Hi, welcome back to Space Thoughts. Today's going to be more of a practical approach to a video. I'm not going to talk about any specific issues or subject matter in outer space law and policy, as my usual videos have, but rather what I'm going to talk about is the practice of law or the practice of law when it comes to space law in itself. Now, there's a great term that goes around space lawyer, which is pretty cool and it gets a lot of attention and people get really excited about it. But I like to think, as the years have gone by, working in this field and just maturing as a lawyer and gaining more experience, I found it's more or less, being a space lawyer really isn't a apt description of what I do. Basically, I look at this, I'm a lawyer that works in the area of outer space law, among other things. I mean, I'm considering, in a sense, I'm a super generalist in that I understand I'm working the general areas of law, but also space law. I've tagged that on as an additional tool on my tool belt. And that's what you gotta kind of look at, I think, in terms of space law. It's basically a tool on your tool belt, right along with contracts, property, torts, criminal law, contract, and everything else that we study in law school and practice in the general areas. Because really, space law has become more prolific in the domestic settings instead of just international in itself. So I get a lot of questions sometimes from prospective law students, from practitioners. How can I be a space lawyer? Or how can I get into space law? And my answer has matured over the years. I've been asked that a lot, but right now when people ask me that, I said, look, first of all, you got to focus on being a lawyer, because let's face it, that we are lawyers at our core, with whatever area we're practicing in. And it's disingenuous, I think, to say that, well, we just do space law, when really space law, it really isn't this really tight, cohesive thing that has specific boundaries, because it bleeds into other areas of law, and actually other areas of law bleed into space law. So I mean, it really is becoming part of, in my opinion, a general practice of law, more and more as time goes on, and more as outer space becomes more prolific in our everyday lives and in our legal environment as well. So fundamentally, what are you as a lawyer? Well, I basically say, I told somebody jokingly, well, you're not quite a human being in a sense when you become a lawyer, because you have additional responsibilities. You're held to a higher standard, both in the practice of law and outside of the practice of law. You're held to a higher ethical standard and a better, and more or less an idea that you should have known better type of standard, as opposed to what a non-lawyer would be. So when I talk to lawyers in particular, there are a bunch of points that I rattle off to them that not only focus on getting into space law, but also on the idea of being a lawyer in general. And this is what this video is going to be about. Number one is that I remind them is, you're a lawyer, you have a license, and that license isn't a right. It's a privilege that you've earned over multiple years between your undergrad, law school, studying for the bar, and passing the bar. Now, with that license is a privilege, and that privilege can be revoked if you don't meet the ethical standards of the legal community in your jurisdiction. I'm from New Hampshire. I work in New Hampshire, and I am under the purview of the New Hampshire Bar and the the rules of professional conduct in New Hampshire. Now, the ABA has these model rules, and most of the rules throughout all the jurisdictions are based pretty much on the ABA rules. What jurisdictions do is kind of flesh out these rules more than the ABA does, which is great, and which is the case here in New Hampshire. One thing I tell aspiring law students, lawyers who want to get into this is, when you're going into this, remember the rules of professional responsibility. And I'm going to bring one up here from New Hampshire that is really, in my opinion, very important to remember. And this is Rule 1.1 of the New Hampshire Bar's professional conduct rules, these ethical rules. And basically what Rule 1.1 is competence. And this mirrors the ABA rule, although it's very fleshed out here. I'm not going to go through each of these bullet points on rule 1.1A and B in particular. But bottom line is you have to have some understanding of the topic you're going to be dealing with, and in particular space law. So if say you're going to be market yourself as being a space lawyer, there's going to be a presumption when you put that out there that you have some experience in this, you have some knowledge, you've studied at least studied this or prepared for this. And so when a client comes in, they're going to be able to expect effective representation. So in other words, if I'm going to say I'm going to be a space lawyer, I got to have some competencies. I've got to have dealt in this in some way. I've either taken some courses or self-study, what have you. When a client comes in, I can actually effectively and correctly represent them in the issue that they're dealing with. This is very important. In fact, I had to remind a few people over the past few years that who were starting to delve into some areas that they really didn't have a lot of knowledge in, but assumed they did. I just told them as basically not really giving them legal advice as much as to take them aside. Look, remember rule 1.1 competencies. Are you really before you get too far involved in this, make sure you really understand it. Because sometimes you get so excited, especially about space law, getting involved in it, we don't think. And we decide, and we jumped right in with both feet. And unfortunately, sometimes you can get into a quagmire, and that can cause you some ethical problems down the road. Remember, a law license is a privilege and it can be taken away. So I'm not trying to discourage you or trying to, cut off the competition. I'm basically saying, look, you want to get involved in space law, that's great, but make sure you have some competencies in space law before you start putting yourself out there for it, because it's only fair to your clients that you do so. And besides, you've got to protect that license, which is paramount. And that gets in the idea of competency. So basically, you need to be competent in order to really do space law or to bring that into your practice. Well, how do you do that? Well, there are multiple ways. You could take an LLM, which is probably the more traditional route. There are several schools here in North America: McGill, Nebraska Law, Ole Miss, and I'm aware of one more overseas in Leiden University, which actually offer these LLMs in space law, and you could actually go that route. Myself, back in 2011 or so, I was actually offered the opportunity to apply for an LLM program at one of these schools, and I did apply and I got accepted, but I decided, because of circumstances and because of career, in my opinion, would have been a good career move, I declined to do that. Long story why, maybe I'll tell it some other time, but not here. But I just thought, from my perspective, my self-study, which actually started in law school, my third year of law school, and my writing and other events that took place in the intervening time between when I applied for the LLM and got accepted, I decided not doing the LLM program would be a good idea for me, and continue on the course I was taking at the time. But that may not be the way you do it. You may want to take an LLM and actually get that degree and get that knowledge. You can do it through self-study. Like myself, I did it through self-study starting in law school for that paper that I wrote that actually got published in an article. I started writing a lot of articles circa 2009 or so. I really started writing a lot about space law, and that's where I gained my competencies in space law. And over the years, those competencies have grown more and more because I'm continuously studying it. And again, through all these things, even once you, like anything else, once you learn space law, start learning it, you're going to be constantly relearning it, because a lot of things are changing, especially with domestic laws and such like that. So LLMs are one route, but again, you got to decide if that's your route, or you want to do it through self-study and actually educate yourself that way, through writing and actually putting yourself out there through published articles, what have you. The whole idea is you got to gain those competencies before you really start putting yourself out there as a space lawyer. And this bleeds into the third point, which is reputation. Shortly after I became an attorney, I met a prominent businessman here in New Hampshire, and he basically, we were sitting down talking, and he said, "You're a lawyer now. You got to be careful of what you say." because people, when you say something, people are going to look at you not as a person, but as a lawyer. So you got to be very careful what you say. And that stuck with me through, in the intervening years. That was probably, God, almost about 20 years ago that this was actually said to me, but it stuck because it was very important. Because, being a licensed attorney is a prestigious thing. You're an officer of the court, and you have to be careful of what you need to be mindful of what you say, because people are probably going to be listening and take that to heart. Even when you put the quote, "This isn't legal advice" around here, just the fact that you're a lawyer is going to have carry a lot of weight and with people when they hear it. So reputation is important, and reputation is something you build over time. How did I build mine? Well, I did a lot of writing. I got on social media, Twitter, for example, and started doing a lot of posts there. And in social media, you got to be extremely careful about how you about what you post, because it can be a spur of the moment thing without thinking, and that's not that for the most part is not usually a good thing. But I got experience through there, built my reputation, but I also built my reputation because I had the competencies beforehand. I was learning. I was doing a lot of writing and such like that actually put my brand out there more, put my ideas and built on my reputation. And that's reputation is a thing you build over time, but can be lost just like that. Social media is a good example. We have a tendency of bypassing the brain to mouth filter or the brain to email filter when we're doing social media, texting, what have you, and it goes just a spur of thought, spur of a moment thought tends to get translated directly to social media, and that can have some unfortunate effects and destroy a reputation you've worked a long time to build. This happened a few years ago with a friend. I made a post that probably was a little bit, it was outrageous, and my friend, texted me and said, "Hey, you might consider removing that and toning it down, because you have a lot of respect and a lot of reputation here, and something like this could blow it." So again, fortunately, I had a good friend who jumped on me and reminded me of that. But again, social media, writing, things like that, those all go towards building your reputation, but they can destroy your reputation too if you're looking to be just to make a splash as opposed to making a point. Oh, granted, you can make a splash of making a point, but we want to make sure you make a good point and that you can back it up as well. That's important. You can have an answer that you can make a comment that isn't accepted, but if you can back it up, hey, go for it, because debate is an important thing. It helps advance the cause. So the first three build into the next point, which is being wrong. Now, the prevalence about people, we get into the habit as lawyers, and people as in general, we want to be right. We got to be right, about a topic, about a subject, about something we've written, about a theory we proposed, and that's great. But lawyers in particular, we tend to have a little bit of an ego. That ego does serve us well in some respects for what we have to do, but we also can get us in trouble, especially if we get so in love with an argument or a particular point, or feel ourselves backed into the corner that we have to just continually defend what we know is a bad point just to be right. That can get us into a lot of trouble, and that can hurt your reputation, your competency, and being and your overall standing as a lawyer. But my philosophy over the past 5 years is not being right, but not being wrong. In other words, I'm going to, if I'm going to write something, if I'm going to make an argument, I'm going to defend it. But if I have a good argument against it, I'm going to look at it and I'm going to consider it and say, you know what, I was wrong, and I'll be willing to admit that I was wrong, and that's not bad as long as I learn something from it, and also it gives me the opportunity to expand on my idea, on my thesis or hypothesis, and flesh it out and maybe go to the next level. Being wrong it basically takes the ego out of it and gives you and puts you in the position where, you know what, I'm not worried about my vanity. I'm not worried about virtue signaling. I'm concerned about not getting it wrong. And that's important, especially when we're practicing and working with clients. We have to be able to say, be able to we were wrong in a particular argument and modify our approach in order to not get it wrong. So that's a competency that, again, we're going back to competency that I learned that's been very effective as a lawyer, not only in general practice, but in space law as well. Case in point, back in 2009, I wrote an article which basically proposed, this big bilateral agreement between the US and the Russian Federation that was based on an existing agreement in the maritime domain. I figured, this would be great. It'd be legally binding. Everybody will get along, and this will solve a big problem in outer space. In the intervening years, in learning things through experience, understanding the geopolitical environment, realpolitik, and lawfare, which if anybody follows my readings, I'm a big on lawfare. I understood that my approach back in 2009 was wrong. It wasn't going to work. So did I get upset and keep on defending it? No, I basically wrote a rebuttal article to my own article. I think it was last year I wrote that, and basically saying, hey, I was wrong. It's not going to work in this geopolitical environment, considering who we're dealing with. It's not going to work. I was wrong. Did I learn something? Hell yeah, I learned. I learned things about the world and about how the law, international law, works in the world, and I created a better thesis. Granted, a lot of people may not like the thesis, but I learned it. So, and this is funny because, some people, a lot of people have talked to me about how can I get involved in the space industry and how can I, stand out. And I said, write an article. There are plenty of venues out there, like the Space Review, for example, which are non-peer reviewed, where you can get your article, where you can submit your ideas and get yourself out there. They do allow for comments, and trust me, there are a lot of people out there who will love to comment on it, whether they have a valid comment or not. Some maybe just there to tell you you're stupid or what have you. But sometimes you do get a challenge from somebody else that you have to sit there and think about it. Say, you know what, maybe that's right. And there's a weakness in my thesis, in my opinion. So I'll have to compensate for that, or rethink my thesis. I mean, granted, there are ad hominem attacks galore out there, especially in social media. That basically means they really can't argue it. They just got to tell you you're wrong just for the sake of being wrong. But that leads into the fifth point, which is criticism. Criticism is great, just to the point that you have to be able to take criticism ad hominem, especially in this political environment right now, which is supercharged. You're going to have to take it and develop a thick skin. In the beginning, I didn't have a thick skin. I fought back against effectively trolls that were out there, criticizing my work just for the sake of criticizing it, and for people who couldn't be right or who couldn't be wrong. And of course, back then I had to be right, which didn't help matters either. But the idea is, over time, I learned to grow a thick skin and look at it, either laugh at it, not respond to it, or actually try to get into have an argument. Now, sometimes, especially online and forums, you're not going to have constructive arguments just because people have got, some people have to really live just to criticize. And of course, my rebuttal is, I'd love to see you write your paper, write your thesis on it. And you usually get crickets about that. But criticism is good because it, again, it helps you to learn the weaknesses in your argument, especially in space law, since this is a emerging field, and there's a lot of room for discussion and a lot of room for new ideas and new theses on how things should be written. So yeah, and I mean, in my case in particular, I don't follow the herd in the sense that I don't follow the mainstream. I go off and I do my own thing, and I think from a lot for myself in terms of my ideas, which don't jive with a lot of the academic environment. And some of them like it, some of them don't. Criticism, and I get criticism for it. Made a few enemies because of it, but what the heck? That's part of the game. I've learned to grow a thick skin, and I've learned to, when I get constructive criticism, not to take it wrong, but to say, "Oh, okay, this is an interesting point. I wonder how I can rebut it, or if I can bolster my argument, or maybe I should relook at my argument." Criticism is hugely important. You're gonna get it, especially if you want to get into this new area of space law and become a space lawyer. So, that's kind of a quick and dirty on practice areas. No, this isn't the CLE, although I think this, something like this would make an excellent CLE topic, in terms of discussing, in terms of how to approach this area of space law. But things I want you to remember is Rule 1.1, competencies, reputation, being not being wrong, and criticism. Those are hugely important, not only as a development as you delve into space law, but into other areas of law, develop yourself as a lawyer. Just to tighten up a little bit on this idea of not being wrong. In my second year of law school, I started working for a solo practitioner in between classes, and basically he said, bottom line is we're always learning in this field, because it isn't called the practice of law for anything, because you're not practicing. You're always learning something, and practice makes perfect. And again, this gets back into being wrong again, because you're going to be wrong sometimes, and sometimes your best lessons are learned from being wrong and not being right. I think being right is it's fun and it's great sometimes to say, hey, I got it right. But that doesn't really, it helps with your confidence, sometimes boosts your ego a little bit. Being wrong is a little bit more, makes you more reflective of your ideas, and makes you look at things a little differently sometimes, which is cool. But bottom line is that's kind of what I have for today. I don't want to go too deep into it. I mean, we could probably turn this into a CLE, at least a 60-minute CLE, to talk about these different ethical rules, how they apply. But understand, you are a lawyer, ethical rules apply. So, don't be jumping into things. And just a side story from a recent with a current client back a few months ago, I was asked, can you do this, this, and this? And I basically said, well, I can do this, but I can't help you with this because I'm not comfortable with it. And they said, and they weren't upset about it. They said, okay, we appreciate you being honest about it. We respect you and stuff like that. So I think if you follow these points, if you contemplate these points, you'll develop a lot of respect, not only in the legal community, but in the non-legal community as well. You're always going to have detractors and people who are going to criticize. It's part of life. You got to grow that thick skin, and you've got to be able to do it. You can either laugh at it, try and debate them, or just plain ignore it. And I found all three strategies you tend to work with, in varying degrees of success. But anyways, that's all I had for this video. I'm hoping you have a good summer so far, and I'll try and get some more of these videos posted over the next couple of weeks. And until then, thank you for joining me. And I'm also going to one thing, I know I put it up here on the screen, but I'm going to ask you to like, share, and subscribe. It does help the algorithm. I'd like to gain more subscribers to the channel. It's definitely an impetus for me to do more of these videos, and actually more frequent videos. So if you found this helpful, do like, share, subscribe. And until then, and if you have any suggestions for what you'd like to see in a video, let me know. If you'd like to see a live video, an actual live session here on Zoom, let me know. I've definitely consider that. So the comments are open for that information below. Please place any thoughts you have in the comments. And until then, we'll talk to you next.